step-aside resolution and recent suspensions are expected to top the agenda at the ANC NEC's three-day meeting. This follows the Secretary-General Elvis Masoch's suspension, which he has refuted. Instead, he will appeal the matter. He says he'd suspended President Cyril Ramaphosa, a move which the party says has no official consequence. The virtual NEC meeting will start tomorrow and end on Monday.
So the African National Congress will hold a special meeting. This special meeting will be held from the 8th to Monday, the 10th of May 2021. It will be held virtually to specifically attend to the following issues: the Integrity Commission reports and setting up of the appeals panel, implementation of resolutions and guidelines on stepping aside, local government elections. You know, the President has already announced or pronounced on the date of local government elections, organizing and campaigns, report on the parliamentary process to amend Section 25 of the Constitution to allow for the expropriation of land without compensation, update on the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the vaccine rollout. So the Special National Executive Committee will be resuming tomorrow to deal with the issues that we have outlined. It comes at the back of the National Working Committee of the African National Congress, which seated is constituted in terms of Rule 13 of the ANC Constitution, which effectively spells out the mandate powers of the National Working Committee, which is to deal with the day-to-day running of the African National Congress and effectively implement decisions of the National Executive Committee. All of these are developments coming out of the National Executive Committee meeting of the African National Congress held on the 26th to the 29th of March 2021.
Still unclear this afternoon if Masoch himself will be part of this meeting.
Everyone who's expected to attend this National Executive Committee meeting is going to attend.
Does that include SG?
We have never come out talking to the media and read out the attendance register of those that attend meetings of the NEC. Samkelo, in the past, Mbali, I think even Bunte, they've asked me whether it was about President Zuma. We have answered, we've given the same answer. Whether it was about Thabo, President Mbeki, we've given the same answer. So it would be unfair and unfortunate that suddenly, in a briefing of the African National Congress, we start going through attendance registers.
Well, it's going to be another of those weekends dominated by a meeting of the ANC NEC members. This weekend, we'll have to consider the consequences of the implementation of the step-aside resolution. As you know, people charged with corruption have been told to step aside or be suspended. Over the last year or so, perhaps for a longer period, the symbol of this has become Elvis Masoch. He has now, we're told, been formally suspended after he refused to step aside. He faces criminal charges in the Free State. He then tried to suspend President Cyril Ramaphosa. This week, the ANC presidency said that that letter that he sent was an attempt to collapse the party. Well, joining us to discuss all of this, what are the implications for this weekend? More importantly, what are the implications for the ANC and our future as a country? Sbu Ngalwa is the politics editor here at Newzroom Afrika. Professor Setulego Madabisi is a political analyst based at the University of the Free State. And Peter Louis Myberg is the journalist and the author of the book. You know the title already, Gangster State, of course, about Elvis Masoch. Sbu Ngalwa, I'm going to start with you. Good afternoon to you. What's at stake at this NEC meeting?
Look, the big question, Stephen, obviously, is whether Elvis Masoch will attend or not. And the reality is that I don't think even the ANC knows. When we checked a while ago with some of his advisors and close associates, it is one of the things that we understand they're still pondering. Because what it means is that if he attends, Stephen, and then the NEC decides to eject him from that meeting in line with the decision by the NWC to suspend him, that would be more embarrassing for him. But at the same time, what they're also contending with is the reality that if he also does not attend, that automatically sends a message that he has accepted his fate, which then means that all this I'm looking for an appropriate word, all the action of the past week would have been in vain. But I think more importantly, though, we do expect, Stephen, that the NEC will rubber stamp the decision of the NWC, because we have seen this before in terms of, for the longest time, we've always argued whether the ANC's NEC is split in the middle or who holds sway. I think that question was answered at the last meeting of the NEC on the 26th of March, when the issue of the replacement of Noma India in fact when the NWC was decided. The grouping that is supporting the president wanted Gwen Ramokgopa to succeed her, while the other grouping that supports Sbu Ngalwa preferred the Minister of Tourism, Mamoloko Kubayi Ngubane. We now know that Gwen Ramokgopa won that vote by about 53 votes, while Mamoloko Kubayi got about 36 of those votes, which pretty much sealed or in a way gave the clearest indication that the president does hold sway in that NEC. So we do expect, in any case, as long as it may take, that they will pretty much rubber stamp the decision of the NEC, of the NWC.
So many different tea leaves to read here. Peter Louis Myberg, you've studied Magashule. You literally wrote the book on Magashule. How do you think he's going to react to all of this? I mean, he's not going to give up without a fight, is he?
Certainly not, Stephen. I don't think having for a couple of years kind of been privy to, I suppose, the political decision making in that faction of the party. I don't think it's something that will be taken lying down. And Mr. Magashule, I think, has been too prominently, elevated to the position of some sort of a cheerleader for this former Jacob Zuma grouping / ex-Premier League faction of the party. I think there's too much at stake for that grouping and its foremost figurehead at this juncture to just take it lying down. What will obviously be interesting to kind of monitor is whether that occurs through some sort of a fight-back effort that happens intra-party inside the ANC, where they've got an appetite to actually consolidate whatever base there might be left and support that there might be left. It doesn't sound like there is that much. Or whether they take the route of earlier disgruntled party members. There's a long history, of course, with a range of characters going from your Julius Malemas to the individuals who formed COPE, whether there's enough of an appetite for this grouping to now finally band together, exit the party and establish something new, which is, of course, also something we've heard rumors about going back to the Nkandla tea meetings, etc. So interesting days ahead.
It's tea or it's tea leaves. There's so much of it at stake at the moment. Professor Sedleko Matabiti, how important is all of this for voters? We've got local government elections. Surely voters are watching this, and some people are going to judge the ANC in different ways to an extent based on how all of this pans out.
Yeah, Peter, the only way I can start off by responding to your question is to paint a picture of what has been happening for many years here in the Free State. I mean, 10, 15 years ago. And by the way, we're talking about somebody who has been the chairperson of a province for more than 10, 15 years, something which should not happen in any democratic dispensation. And I think that's where the problem starts. The moment if you sleep and eat power, nothing else will matter to you. And that's why I agree with Peter. We still going to see a huge fight from Magashule. For the very first time in the Free State, I mean, we had members of the ANC marching on Luthuli House with placards stating openly that we don't want Magashule. And even today, yet again, two groupings, one press conference early this morning and another one later this afternoon, to the same ANC in the Free State, but with different views. Now, that is it gives you an indication of how far we have come in terms of Magashule, the person that currently, I strongly believe, embodies and represents, the so-called groupings, RET groupings, which I strongly just believe that they are fighting for their political life. But in a short, there are voices that is currently, moving into the public domain that says we are not going to allow this, especially in the Free State. We are not going to allow certain things to happen in the ANC in our name.
Elvis Masoch, I mean, you're listening to all of this. How important a moment is this for the ANC? Because, I mean, supporters of, let's just call it the renewal project, if I can call it that for a moment. Some people use the word reform. Pule Mabe tried to rebuke me last week and say I should use the word renewal instead. I mean, this is surely crucial to the renewal project in the African National Congress.
Firstly, let me express, my humble greetings to you, Stevens, and my colleagues who form part of the panel. And my best to all people in South Africa. Stephen, I think what is unfolding, broadly speaking, in the ruling party, it is, an evolution of a new epoch. And the better we come to terms with that, just, analysts, the media, the broader citizenry, the better. Because remember, up to now, there is a fierce factional warfare in the ANC between those who support, the moral and ethical cleansing ceremony project, and on the other side, there is a faction that supports the status quo, particularly in terms of state capture. So, and definitely, whether you like it or not, it's a zero-sum game, it's a zero-sum warfare. One of the factions has to win. They are not prepared to settle for any middle ground. Whether the cleansing ceremony project wins or maybe the state capture project wins is something else. But at the end of the day, for the ANC to exist even into the next century, it will allow this evolution of a new epoch to unfold. And it can only unfold when one faction within this particular factional warfare has to emerge victorious. But yes, the consequences are dire, whether you like it or not. For example, right now, it is quite clear that the Zuma faction is losing grip, is losing power, and obviously they will be pushed into forming a new splinter organization. So I will not be surprised, but what is happening is that we are witnessing a very unique evolution of a new epoch in the ANC that must determine what the ANC stands for, because whether you like it or not, the ANC cannot remain what it has been up to now.
Elvis Masoch, do you believe the ANC survives this process? I mean, there would be a split, but how damaging would that be in your view?
The other time I was undertaking a comparative documentary assessment, between different liberation movements. And a notable, realization is that the ANC, it has proved to be a survivor of some sort. They've been through so much. There are times in history where commentators, observers thought that, the ANC will definitely, not exist beyond that particular line. But, to the surprise of many, it will always rise from any challenge and keep on marching forward. So even, for example, it is not for the first time that the ANC has to suspend or even possibly expel a very powerful, figure in the liberation movement. It's not for the first time. But the question is, what happened after that? But I've got some instinct in me that says history is on their side in terms of political survival. They will also find a way to transcend this Ace Magashule moment, because that's exactly where they stand right now.
Continue the conversation. Good afternoon to you. Continue the conversation here on Newsfeed about the future of our country. With us today, Sbu Ngalwa, the Newzroom Politics Editor, Professor Setlecho Matabisi, the Political Analyst at the University of the Free State, Peter Louis Myberg, the journalist, author of the book Gangster State, big favorite in the Magashule household, I understand, and Elvis Masoch, a political analyst. Peter Louis, I mean, when we talk about the different factions, the groups within the ANC, and particularly in the Free State, he was running the Free State ANC for so long that he seems to have a real entrenched networks there. That surely means that those people will fight almost to the political death to protect him.
Stephen, one would have expected that. And I was actually quite surprised. Somebody remarked actually to me this week that, it's quite a remarkable contrast between the original court appearance last year, November, in relation to the asbestos matter, and earlier this year in terms of the turnout in support for Mr. Magashule, and what we have seen this week. You'd recall, I think some of your viewers might also recall, that if we go back to around the time in which Julius Malema, for instance, was in the process of being expelled from the governing party, there was tremendously powerful groundswell support in the Johannesburg CBD around the Latuli House building. And it seems to have simmered down. So one would expect, or one has to be curious as to whether the initial showing at the the Bloemfontein High Court in regard to the asbestos matter, whether that is an iteration of organic, real groundswell support, or whether that is just simply a case of people being bussed in from various parts of the country, including the Free State, to come and show support for the former Premier. I do not at this stage get a sense that there are really, in large numbers, die-hard Ace Magashule supporters who are going to continue, at court appearances throughout this ongoing internal battle in the ANC. We're going to rock up, go through the effort of pitch up and come out in support of Ace Magashule. I might stand to be corrected. It doesn't feel like that support is there any longer.
Professor Sedlego Matabisi, I mean, in politics sometimes when you're no longer in power, wow, you feel it. The cold wind of no longer being in power suddenly hits you hard. Professor Matabisi, could that be what's actually happening now?
Yeah, well, you also ask about the electoral support. Well, I can predict the support will forever be there for the African National Congress if we just take into consideration the outcome of the recent by-elections throughout the country. But for Ace Magashule, the person, and I can even predict now, even if they go and form another party, there's absolutely no way. You can now fill up stadiums and all that, busloads of people attending court cases. There's a huge difference between leading a party and being part of a giant of a political party like the African National Congress, despite all its challenges. But I think for me, and I have been somebody who have not even tried to align myself with the so-called step-aside rules. The ANC does not need a step-aside rule. They does have a constitution. But I think what has been happening in the ANC and what is going to happen to people like Ace Magashule will definitely is going to be cold outside of the African National Congress. But as he have boldly stated, that is definitely not going to leave the ANC. And I think somebody of Ace Magashule's stature and those around him have realized how cold it can be outside of the African National Congress, and they are going to fight for their dear life. And the question is, what is going to happen to the organization, the African National Congress? And remember, we're facing a local government election. People are not necessarily suddenly going to vote for the Democratic Alliance or the EFF, but go and look at each local government election, the issue of voter turnout. That is going to play, once again, a significant role in regard to the outcome of the elections. And each time, it's the ANC that is paying the price for a voter turnout.
Sbu Ngalwa, politics editor here at Newzroom Afrika. I don't know when you sleep, frankly. But Professor Anthony Butler, you'll know him. He's the author of the book about Cyril Ramaphosa, also literally read the book about it. He suggested in a piece this morning published online by Business Day that President Ramaphosa could have got rid of Ace Magashule relatively easily quite a while ago, but decided instead to follow a process of creating a system in which people who are charged will have to step aside. And the point that Butler seems to be making is that after this, because Magashule will go in his analysis, people who are charged in the ANC in the future will have to step aside. And by doing that, he's actually changing the culture of the ANC. Do you go along with that analysis?
Look, I agree with the one part that when Ace Magashule goes, or when he eventually accepts his stepping aside, that in a way will cascade to all the other levels, including those within the ANC who are currently defiant because they're emulating him. But where I would differ with him is on the fact in arguing that the president could have gotten rid of Ace Magashule sooner. I don't think so. I think the president understands that when he won at Nazareth, that he may have won the presidency, but he did not win the entire conference. And at that time, also the NEC, the split in that top six proves that. And also the split even at the NEC at that time, showed that he could not do as he pleases. So over time, what he has done, and to his credit we must say, he has been able to win over some of those people who would have ordinarily have been aligned to the NDZ, Magashule, Jacob Zuma grouping, and has gained confidence of those very members of the NEC, which has made it easy for him and some of his supporters. Because remember, even when these resolutions were accepted by conference, I don't think that some of the people who agreed to these resolutions actually thought that they would ever be implemented, because the ANC does have a history of adopting resolutions that it never implements. But through time and a fierce fight in those NEC meetings, it got to a point where a resolution like Step Aside had to come into effect, and it became inevitable that someone like an Ace Magashule who faces criminal charges would have no choice but to step aside. But I think also, though, where it benefits or it looks good on President Ramaphosa is that if you look at the 2016 electoral outcomes, I think the ANC was sitting at around 53% overall. But 2019 was a better election, where I think they got about 57%. And that, one can argue that was on the back of some of the promises that a Ramaphosa president was meant to be about, which is about fighting corruption, which is about rebuilding the economy. If we cannot be able to rebuild the economy due to COVID-19, at the very least, one of those promises, which is a tough hand on corruption, has to at least be realized. And I think that does reflect positively on the president, and also in trying to turn around that image. I don't think it will take the removal of Ace Magashule or him stepping aside for the ANC to turn the corner in terms of that general perception, as the party has also said that they are seen as being a corrupt organization. I think over time they can be able to do that, but that's also assuming that the current leadership will be in place at the end of next year when the ANC goes to conference.
Now, you keep that firmly in a box. We'll talk about that later. Elvis Masoch, I mean, what do you think? Do you think that Ramaphosa was right to play the longer-term game here? So, I mean, there's a famous clip, I'm sure you saw it during Nasrec, of him telling supporters, yes, Ace Magashule has only won by 24 votes. Yes, he'll be the Secretary-General. But I think the phrase he used was, we've established a beachhead, and as a result, we will win in the end. Do you think it was better politically to take a long time to win in the end than to have tried to get sort of Ace Magashule out of the way a year ago?
Yeah, Stephen, one thing that I've, observed, if not discerned, throughout the years, particularly from 1994, when you make an introspection on, macro-political hegemony, particularly, basing it within the ANC as a ruling party in South Africa, you will realize that, for a leader, for particularly a top senior leader, to end up assuming hegemony within that particular organization, you must make a choice, a very penultimate choice. You choose whether do you want to win a battle or do you want to win a war. And the moment a leader decides or resolves to win a battle, then you are going to observe a situation whereby that leader will just act, very prematurely. You just rush to defeat your enemy. It's when you have set yourself to win a battle. But when you want to win a war, an ultimate war, you become very much patient. You know their processes and procedures. You create an impression that you are following processes and procedures, knowing fully well that you are gradually digging up a trench, knowing that your opponents will be complacent, will end up thinking you are weak, you are afraid of them. At a time when they don't expect, they find themselves into that particular trench, and that's when you're trapped. And I think that's a very powerful, a strategy that Cyril Ramaphosa used. He didn't choose to win a battle. He chose to win a war. And that's why he has been patient. And you'll agree with me, Stephen, that since Ramaphosa became ANC president from December 2017 up until maybe 2 years ago in 2019, many people, branded him as, a weak leader, a coward, a person who is afraid of the likes of Jacob Zuma, who is afraid of Ace Magashule and the likes. But they were not aware that Ramaphosa chose to pursue a war, not a battle. That's why it took him some time, but knowing that at the end of the day, he's going to win the war. And that's exactly what we're seeing today. Ramaphosa forfeited the benefits of a battle, but chose to go for a war. And that's why even right now, you can see the likes of Ace Magashule, his epic nemesis, is now facing a very, cold, frigid, wilderness outside. So because Ramaphosa chose, to go for a war rather than a battle.
It's a lovely way to look at it, Elvis Masoch. Thank you. We'll continue with our panel. We'll come back with a question for Peter Louis Myberg. The weapons to win political wars tend to involve resources and money. You join our panel, the future of the ANC, and I suppose by extension the future of the country. Sbu Ngalwa, our politics editor at Newzroom Afrika. We gave him a quick cup of coffee during the break. Professor Setulefo Matabisi is political analyst at the University of the Free State. Peter Louis Myberg, the journalist, the author of that book, Gangster State. Elvis Masoch, the political analyst. Elvis Masoch ended just before the break talking about the analogy of rather winning the war rather than the battle. And Peter Louis, that takes me immediately to the weapons of a political fight, which tend to involve money and resources. Surely, if we accept what is in your book, and I think we must, then that shows that Ace Magashule and the people around him have plenty of resources to fight any battles or wars that come their way.
Stephen, it's an interesting phenomenon. I think we, in the Free State iteration of our state capture years, we might sit with a situation where a large pile of that funding, and we have to keep in mind there are massive amounts of money involved here. The Free State asbestos scandal is Tina. We're looking at multi-billion rand contracts, of which, by the looks of it, portions of it was siphoned off over the years. What I do not think is that somewhere in some of these cases, especially maybe true for Mr. Magashule, that there's now a gigantic pile of cash waiting to be utilized for the purposes of his resurrection of his political career. Because having managed the patronage network in the Free State that kept him going required ongoing disbursement of those funding, that funding. And, I do believe, and I hope that I've illustrated it pretty clearly in some instances in Gangster State, where, the money comes from these contracts, it goes to the political sort of avenues, and then it gets dispensed with pretty much immediately to keep your supporters on your side. Throughout those years, at those very hotly contested provincial executive conferences where, and I'm sure that the professor would also be very well aware of some of these conferences, where sometimes, quite literally almost, there was blood on the ground. There was very large amounts of money spent on those conferences to keep Ace Magashule's supporters happy. People were bussed to those conferences and kept in very nice accommodations. Food had to be bought. So I think for Mr. Magashule's continued survival, he relied in those years of really sort of keeping the grips of power in the Free State. He relied on a tender patronage system, by the looks of it, where portions of these government contracts, the Free State asbestos being one of it, gets diverted for his political purposes, and this gets dispensed with immediately. So what happens in December 2017 is a little bit of a poison chalice when he wins the SG position. So now he supposedly gets elevated to a sought after and more senior political position, but that has the effect of him leaving his position of access to these vitally important tender patronage networks, going to the Thule House and effectively isolating himself from that stream of revenue. And I think that has left him out of pocket and vulnerable, to be honest.
It's fascinating, and none of our panelists were shaking their heads listening to you, Peter Louis. Everyone was nodding, and I don't want to speak for them, but I think in agreement. Professor Matabisi, Peter Louis mentioned you there. What's so interesting about that, then, is that Ace Magashule could have had a long time running effectively the politics of the Free State, managed the achievement of becoming the Secretary General of the governing African National Congress, and that's a major political achievement, get suspended, be forced out or whatever it is, and have almost nothing to show for it. I find that incredible.
Yeah, no, it was long coming. If the ANC was not going to act, and I'm not only referring to Ace Magashule, the person. If you look at what is happening, even with the so-called renewalists in the African National Congress, in 2018, exactly on the 18th of February, I wrote on my Facebook page to say it is game on, and it's going to be a messy game. And exactly 3 years and 66 days later, we are seeing that this messy game getting even more messier. But the problem with that is that, a hungry stomach does not know any allegiance, no loyalty at all. And some leaders have mastered that of dispensing, money to ensure that they remain in power. And I do agree with Peter Lewis. It's going to become extremely difficult, and it's extremely sad. But this is what the African National Congress has become. Every single little elective conference, whether it is at branch level. Actually, I often say that we've got two ANCs. You've got an ANC that is united when there is national events. But immediately after that national event, you will see the top six smiling and all that. But then immediately after, even at branch level, you can go to any small little town, a city and all that. It's huge divisions going on within the African National Congress. And the issue of gatekeeping, that have really, some people like Ismail have ascended to this powerful position because of that. You are an ANC member in good standing for 2-3 years, but just before any elective conference, one branch chairperson will decide whether you are a member or not. And unfortunately, what is happening, then what they will do, they will send a provincial delegate from the province to go and oversee branch elections. But the very same delegates, even from national level, from Rutuli House, are conflicted. And that's where the problem is actually lying within the African National Congress. Currently, the so-called black bag phenomenon is playing a huge role in terms of the outcome of elective conferences. And when is the ANC going to arrest this? That is a huge question.
It's so interesting, Elvis Masoch, because what we're talking about is almost a culture of continual internal conflict and contestation within the ANC. And we know that this is sometimes about resources. Now, in a country like ours, with huge poverty, the worst inequality on the planet, a racialized inequality at that, it's actually very difficult to stop that from happening. I mean, in a rural community, sometimes government is the only source of income. You either work for government or you're a contractor for government. I mean, some people have suggested that people, even cleaners working for a municipality, only get a job and therefore access to a salary, if they're a member of a local branch, for example. I mean, it sounds incredible, and yet that, I think, is what may be happening. How do we change that?
Yeah, Stephen, historically, the concept of politics was idealized to serve as an art of governance or an art of service, a service to that respective community. But when the trend of politics was busy evolving, it arrived at a point whereby it was hijacked by whoever hijacked it and turned it into an art, of benefit, a technique that must be used by those who dominate politics in order to benefit from society. But if you gouge into it, particularly the literature of political philosophy, you'll realize that politics as a concept, it was designed to be an art of governance, an art of service to that community. But somewhere along the course of history, it was hijacked by what I can refer to as, predatory politicians, and suddenly turned it upside down. And from that moment, politics became an art, a technique that must be used to benefit from a society. And that is why even today, and not only in South Africa, not only on the African continent, across the world, international problems across the globe, are problems of leadership, the failure of leadership. Every community will say, our leaders have taken what was supposed to be for us, but they've taken that for themselves, for their own benefit. And that is why even in the ruling party, the ANC, and now remember, politicians have, coalesced around, business people. That's why during elections, prior to elections, there must be these business friends who must be there to advance you, and on condition that when they win that mayoral seat, when they win that provincial legislature, then you will be, the chosen one to benefit from government's contract and tender. So it's unfortunate that politics has taken a new philosophic dimension It is no longer, a technique to service the community, but it has become a sort of, not necessarily a trigger, but, a new terrain whereby people benefit from unsuspecting, electorate. So that's exactly what is happening. It's not an anomaly what is happening in the ANC. Even established, political parties like the Democratic Party in the US, the Republican Party in the US, the same is happening, but although the gravity is not the same when you compare it to what is happening in South Africa or other African countries. So the problem is the way politics in a contemporary sense has been idealized. It is no longer serving communities, but is taking away from communities.
You can just have a look at who got PPE contracts in Britain during the start of the pandemic to see exactly the point you're saying, Elvis Masoch, that this is something that happens everywhere. Sbu Ngalwa, I mean, the point that Elvis Masoch was making there about a sort of how politics, in so many places has become about this sort of predatory politics. I mean, Exhibit A is the Zondo Commission. How important has the Zondo Commission been for the president? I mean, was all of this carefully timed, choreographed, to use a more political word, that his appearance at the Zondo Commission happened at a very good time and he would have been able to decide when to appear?
I think the Zondo Commission has actually been, one, embarrassing for the ANC, but I think the president's posture towards the Zondo Commission is what is important for the ANC and what may be its saving grace. I mean, some people have argued, and I agree rightfully so, that at the Zondo Commission is the ANC pretty much on trial. I mean, all those cases, and it goes back to the very issue that I think Elvis is making and also Peter Louis is making about how access to these positions of government and powerful positions became a cash cow for the ANC. And for me, I do not even believe that even if you deal with every member of the ANC who's charged with corruption, there is corruption at the branch level, going to the very point that the professor was making about a manipulation of membership. I mean, I come from a township called Danzane in East London, where when someone is appointed as a councillor, then you suddenly see the resurfacing of the road. Only that one road that goes past their place. So it goes to that level, to that local level, Stephen. But coming back to the issue of the president, I think the president's appearance as the Zondo Commission was important for the image of the ANC. But also, I think, in him trying to project himself as the leader who wants to take the ANC out of what I would call out of the doldrums. Or actually to rescue the ANC from its negative image. I think to an extent, he did that. But the reality is that he's a politician, and he knows how the ANC raises money. I mean, he knows how the ANC is funded. Elections, not even party political elections. I'm talking about national elections. And that relationship, that questionable, controversial relationship between business and politics, and access, what that access to power means for ruling parties like the ANC. But what may rescue the ANC is not actually the ANC itself, but rather it may be what we have seen now with the introduction of the party political funding. But also remember, what we missed at the last NEC is that they introduced a very important committee, which is the Electoral Elections Committee led by Kgalema Motlanthe. Now, that committee is the committee that will filter through their candidates. For the first time, it's not just about the one most popular person being a candidate or one who shouts the most or sings the best being the candidate, but rather looking through the CVs of those members. So perhaps that may see a culture change in the ANC.
Sbu Ngalwa, our politics editor, thanks very much indeed. I know you're not going to get any sleep this weekend. I really do appreciate the time. My thanks also to Professor Setelecho Matabisi, the political analyst at the University of the Free State, Peter Louis Myberg, the author and journalist, author of the book Gangster State, around Ace Makashile, and then joining us as well, the political analyst Elvis Masoch. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. I really do appreciate it.